So man of the hour. I thought I had only 15 minutes. So, first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity. Much has been given to many of us, and of course, much is expected as well. I feel very blessed coming from a family of 7 kids. Number 6 was the title that I carry, and I have learned a tremendous amount while serving within the Corps of Engineers. So, with the past few days within the Rock Island District, I just want to say thanks to that team that has helped my continued education on what we're doing as a nation. I'll put a bottom line up front, and then I'll add some comments to try to support that. And it's a theory in a sense, but I am convinced after serving the nation within uniform, and again, I'm just a third generation. My father was in the Army, my grandfather. In fact, my grandfather was born up in St. Paul, Minnesota. So it's been fun for me to learn my own roots where we've traveled as a family. But the theory is collaboration up front is really the new fast, if you will. In other words, to race to solutions without considering all of those that are affected, I think is history, at least in this nation. And the ability to make sure we're collaborating, I think is, and I'm not a business person per se. I try to read, Harvard Business Review and other magazines, but the reality is I think collaboration up front is a key thing that works. I do believe a systematic approach in terms of flood mitigation and flood control is key, and all the things that are part of that as well. And the Mississippi River Valley, or the Mississippi Valley Division and the Mississippi River Commission completely support that. A lot of history that we can draw upon along the river. We often refer to the Mississippi River and tributaries as an example, but candidly that was in a history that doesn't exist in the same sense as today. But there's still things we can learn. And I'll highlight over the past 3 weeks ago, the Mississippi River Commission had a chance to go to the Mekong River. I don't know if anyone knows where that's at. It's an interesting conversation with my father describing, why am I going to Vietnam after what he had served in. But the reality is, has anyone heard of the Mekong River? Okay, good. All right. I've got some experts. But it literally winds around Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. But it's an interesting case study on when you've got multiple countries that don't have an overarching federal system, for example, that we have, at least as a nation, one nation that we enjoy. But on that topic, I do believe that the economic vitality, which many are striving for in the example of the Mekong River, requires that comprehensive strategy with all the interests that go into that. The example I'll use, and I got to marry a political scientist to keep me straight on these, but my wife is the smarter in terms of the understanding other nations. But what I was starting to realize on that particular trip is that when a single interest, in the example that we had a chance to visit a hydropower dam under construction, which did include a lock system and a fish ladder, an attempt to bring in other components. But the reality was it was going to move out very quickly for hydropower. That was the demand signal that Thailand needed, and Laos was willing to give up whatever it could to get that revenue from hydropower, and then figure out the consequences later. And those are big consequences, as you go down the river into the delta. In this case, Vietnam was affected by that. But the reality is there's really no way to slow down those demands, and they'll figure out the problems later. I don't think we're better than that, I think, as a nation. And others look to us and are envious of what we have and the ability to sort out the differences and move ahead in a little less, large pendulum swings, if you will. So I think that's a quality that we can strive for and be an example. It is a system. There's no doubt about it when it comes to watersheds. I am not a farmer. I have to go back a few generations to connect in California and up in the state of Washington. But what I've realized is that the connection and understanding how the watershed works, I learned more within the Mississippi Valley along the watershed than I have even in my own state. I mean, I grew up, I was mentioned to someone earlier, in the 70s in California when it was a drought. I just thought levees were bike paths that were elevated. I didn't know what the whole connection was. Nice view of a creek that was supposed to be a bigger river. I've since coming back there and having a chance to serve in California again, I've realized that obviously there's a lot going on with obviously an aquatic watershed for species, and of course the flyaway zones, and just an amazing system that someone had the forethought to figure out and try to put into action. But that knowledge is dated, and the things that are still needed, like in this case on the upper system, we do need the hydraulic model to help us understand where the water is going. It'll certainly inform that strategy that we strive for, and we're proud to be part of that. Now that's only part of the solution. What I really wanted to highlight, my last real engagement, I think with most of you, may have been up in Hannibal during the, I think we called it the Levee Summit. I was very impressed to hear more perspectives than I even thought would come together at once. And I thought that was a great example of starting to bring that coalition together. And I think tomorrow to have the, well, I am not going to be there. I've got the districts that will be here. To have multiple states coming together to discuss, their interests and how they come and affect others is very impressive. The alignment is needed, with the landowners, the states, the congressional delegations, and of course, whatever federal agencies interact, the Corps being one of those, FEMA being another one. Up and down the Mississippi Valley Division, at least, we've got plenty of examples of where it has worked. Even at the federal level, obviously we don't have a lot of agreement sometimes, but we're getting a little bit better. What I wanted to highlight, for example, with that Hannibal Levee Summit, is that if that is able to continue, you will have an example, I think, and I'll just use one in the case of my backyard, at least where I live today. Between the state of Mississippi and the state of Louisiana, the northern portion of Louisiana, there's an understanding between two levee districts, a gentleman named Peter Nimrod and Reynold Minsky, if any of you know those gentlemen. But they understand the rules, if you will. And it's helpful to have that reliability, to know what actions are acceptable and what are not. In the 2011 flood, my predecessor, a couple removed, General Walsh, realized that continuing to fight a flood in Mississippi was not exactly the understanding that was reached earlier, and how that would impact Louisiana had to be considered. So having those rules and having some reliability on how a system will perform is good business for all of us. I'm looking for John in the audience. I had a great meeting with John in the Rock Island District. Oh, great. Okay, John, I'm going to get this wrong, so feel free to bail me out. But acknowledged during that meeting, look, as he described it, being a farmer, if he could understand and be reasonably compensated if he was going to take on water in a flood, and know how others would be affected and how they would respond and be part of a system, is invaluable. And I think that's the least we can do and demonstrate as a nation, is to come to some agreement on how to work with each other, even across state boundaries as well. So I think there's a lot of promise to get there. The speed at which we'll get there, I don't know. I do know that the partnership is needed. I'm a huge fan of the education that all of you are dedicated to describing to our elected officials and anyone else making decisions, what's at stake when we make watershed decisions, whether it be environmental, flood control, navigation. All these things are operating within the same footprint often, or at least the same watershed. So educating those decision makers is what I applaud you to do. I am learning myself constantly. My mother and father were both school teachers in their later years, and they're retired and still out there in California. But always learning is a key theme, throughout that group of 7 kids. We're still not done, obviously. Our parents remind us of that routinely. But the decisions that are being made, I hope, are educated, and that's where I think this group and these forums, come together and make the most value. Got a number of folks that will be here throughout the day tomorrow, and I guess if you said I had an hour here, and I guess I could entertain questions and answers. But yeah, I'm more than willing to take on any questions and add perspective. I think the last thing I'll just mention related to those decisions that are being made Even with our own headquarters within the Corps of Engineers, we've realized that the rate of change, with the new administration is so fast that we've got to really communicate routinely, not just in this example that was discussed last week, a quarterly basis. That's way too long. So constant, ongoing dialogue is so essential. And that's just within one federal agency, the Corps of Engineers. I won't go into the examples that we're being learned from, but one of them being DAPL and others, when guidance doesn't match previous guidance, we're responding and reacting. But with that topic, I'll just open it up again for any thoughts or questions, and I've got a team here to bail me out if I get stuck. Mike, I knew you wouldn't wait.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate this. We have a little different format, because you're able to come tonight and listen, and we'd be able to listen to your presentation. And I'm the last of 7 kids, so we have that in common. But one of the things I think everybody's on everybody's mind is, with the new administration, what do you see about infrastructure? Do you think it's an opportunity for those that are interested in seeing improvements? Any guidance that you could provide on how the Corps may be able to work with us a little bit more to actually see NEST move forward, as well as some of the flood control needs that we have in a number of the cities? So maybe some comments on how you see things might be different this next year or two that we might be able to take advantage of.
Mike, great comments. And in fact, I read your article, at least that you were quoted in, and I saw the reference, of course, to flood control and how it's connected to the what appears to be the administration's focus on energy and infrastructure. Navigation will summarize that as, for example. And I literally was asking my staff and team, Chuck Camilla specifically, hey, how do I make sure I understand what Mike Klinger just said in that article? And how do I draw that connection? There's different examples, throughout different watersheds. I got in a little bit of trouble. Well, not trouble. I spoke the hornet's nest a little bit when we were interfering with navigation down in, actually, I guess it was Hickman, Kentucky. Is that right, Jim? Where we had the Bendway weirs?
South of there, sir.
Yeah. So just south of that area where we were interrupting navigation to put in some Bendway weirs to improve navigation to sink mat, for example. And I just made the claim, look, these two are connected. You cannot, keep a river navigable if you can't influence where it flows, in terms of keeping it within its banks. That wasn't necessarily appreciated by the navigation industry. They thought I was kind of blend two things together. But I honestly believe that's a clear case. And what I would highlight in terms of your question with the administration, that there is more to a list of 50 projects, and there are multiple lists out there, than just energy and transportation infrastructure. It is a system. I mean, the infrastructure is moving agriculture, for example. It's relying upon flood control that obviously enables us to live this riparian lifestyle next to a river that makes it economical to move. Intermodal, I agree, but certainly to connect that. And of course, there are environmental concerns and considerations to make sure it's sustainable. The less energy we put against trying to fight nature, probably the better in terms of making it a good business model in the long run. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your whole question, Mike, but I honestly believe that it's not just a question of what's the infrastructure that needs to be constructed. And we talked about NESP earlier this week, that they are connected. And I think NESP is a good model of where these two things, the environment and navigation, need to move together. And it's in law, which is pretty impressive. I guess 86 WRDA, if I understood that right. So I think that'll be a good example. And then any other locations that we can make that connection is good as well. I don't know that the person I was speaking with at the end of that, Gretchen, is here, but she, or at least somebody pointed out, hey, if we're not following that, it'll just get bogged down very quickly in lawsuits, which is not productive usually. So, but Mike, did that get close to feedback that you're looking for?
I was hoping you'd be able to write a check.
Yeah, did I mention, so that, I'm glad you actually pointed this out. So that list of 50, and Jim Bodron and others can help me out. For FY18, they're looking at public-private partnerships. I mean, I guess they're acknowledging you can't influence the federal budget in 18. That is a really hard thing to do. We're realizing with the one test case we've got up in Fargo-Moorhead, it's going to be a slow adjustment to the rules at the federal level. And then I think 19 is more dedicated to the federal funds that are available. Not that I'm writing that check, but any other questions or thoughts from Mike? That's an open invitation, by the way. It's not limited, so anytime. Please, Drew.
General Wehr, first, thank you for your service and thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for participating with the Basin Association earlier in the week in that conversation. Kind of following up on what Mike said, I know you know this, but I just want to impress upon you that there were decades of conversation and litigation and conflict and controversy that led to an agreement finally on how we were going to improve and modernize our laws. And that included what was authorized in the 2007 WRDA. And after 10 years of waiting for that to happen, it looks like potentially an infrastructure bill is maybe going to move forward. And it appears as though one of the things being considered is how quickly we can get some of this stuff done. And so obviously we've been talking to you and the states have been talking to you, and a big priority for us is to have that project move forward. And I would just ask if there's any way, it appears as though our ability to do that stuff quickly is going to be a big piece of that. So the extent to which we can continue working with you on how can we identify the projects and how quickly can we move in getting some of this stuff done. Some of the things that were communicated in the different lists that you were talking about was being able to move to construction within a year. And so I think that's a completely different paradigm that we really need to be thinking about if we're going to compete and be able to get some of these projects done that we've all been waiting decades to have happen. And so the other thing I would say is that it's authorized as a dual purpose program, and I think it's important that we, in order to continue to have support to be able to implement the lock improvements, we need to make sure that we're implementing that consistent with how Congress authorized it. Otherwise, I'm afraid we're going to end up in court and not be able to get the stuff done. We appreciate your willingness to listen to us and work with us, but really, we want to keep working with you on how can we make sure we're ready and we can move these things forward if there's an opportunity to do it, because it looks like it's as good an opportunity as we've certainly had in recent years.
No, I'm glad you pointed this out. I spent the last couple of days going to various locks and dams, 3 of them, I think, 17, 16 in LaGrange. And there's a number of things that are very innovative to just sustain barely, and that won't last too much longer. Not taking anything away from the great Americans trying to do this in partnership with others, but that can only go so long. So I'm excited for that. And we are trying to figure out, at least within the Corps, and the regulatory or the permitting, as well as the legal portions that enable these projects to move forward. What are those limiting factors out there that we can address early on? I think I mentioned in the morning a couple days ago some of the engagements that are taking place. The names are changing, I guess, but the reality is we've got the administration seeking out and understanding what takes place. The one example I used a couple days ago was down in Southwest Pass, in terms of dredging, getting aboard a hopper dredge to understand how does that work, and how does that investment strategy. That's got a whole nother set of challenges, but I guess my whole point on the takeaway is people are out there trying to learn and to make the right decisions, and hopefully we can inform them in time before they say, just do this in a year, would you? In reality, it doesn't quite. If we get that full upfront funding, for example, you can almost cut timelines in half, and maybe that's something that'll be entertained. So, thanks, Drew. Appreciate it. All right. I'm not sure I'm delivering on the man of the hour here. Please. Okay, it's a tag team. Mike and Drew.
Another follow-up question. When we looked at the comprehensive plan that was
going to throw out a lifeline because I don't know of all the conversations that are taking place. Jim, go ahead. I've got a thought, but I want to make sure it's educated. John, Jim. We don't have a wireless mic, do we? If not all. All right, Jim. Got a whole leash. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. The administration is very much aware of the Word of 16, and we're starting to formulate and work on guidance on how to implement that. I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but the administration has a process to work through on how that guidance would be interpreted and applied.
Do you mind if you step back just a little? That's good.
So things are moving on that front, but they're not moving as quickly as you would like, and I'm sure that there'll be time for the new administration to weigh in on that when we get a new permanent ASACW.
I'm just going to leave it right here so I don't get in trouble. What other? I don't think you got everything you wanted there, Mike. But any other part of that you can shed light on?
I think you don't really have the answer right now because you have a new administration. But
Right.
that has been, we understand in some of our conversations that other projects have been approved with a low NED, looking at the regional economic model. And of course, you've already done that once. It had a very high regional economic development, 5-to-1 return on investment. So, those are some of the things that, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of that's already been done. So I think that's what we're looking for, to help get support from the core, that these are things that make sense, that, as we mentioned earlier, that tie into all the uses of the river, and anything the core can do to help us, through this process, we certainly appreciate it.
I was going to add up front, but I think this is probably the right time to describe. We have our, if you have not met General Semonite, Todd Semonite, who's our new Chief of Engineers. You may recognize the name. He was our deputy, actually, under General Bostic. He has hit the ground running faster than any other chief I'm aware of because he, in fact, having the deputy experience, he's moving out very quickly. If you haven't done this, please Google Lieutenant General Semonite on the road videos. He does a video everywhere he goes to understand and explain to others what the Corps does and how we interact. But what I wanted to highlight is that he is seeking out what are the roadblocks to various processes that the Corps has been hamstrung with in the past, and then trying to figure out an answer to his the ASACW in this case and others. What is it that's the limiting factor? I guess is the key takeaway. So he's eager to find those. He was challenging us from day one on his first visit. I guess it was out in Brandon Road where Craig Baumgartner explained what we're doing there. And it was just, hey, how can we do this faster? And that's just a study. So I think we're eager for those opportunities. And then working it through the language and the law as well. Okay. Any other questions? You guys just need to stay after class and we'll have a conversation.
I apologize, but
No.
nobody else is going to ask. I'm going to ask. And this is more of maybe a request rather than a question. But we've had a lot of discussion about how to proceed on what's the next step on a study and how we move forward on flood risk management, flood control, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of it has generated into discussions of process and what is it this kind of study or that kind of study? And I would just request that if there are opportunities that we can move forward in scoping a study that looks at what we all want to get out of it, that's a much more productive way of proceeding rather than focusing on the process. And so the extent to which we can get some resources and we can work with you, all of us, to figure out how we scope something that's going to allow us to move forward, I think everybody would be interested in doing that.
I think I experienced two studies. Maybe they're the extremes, perhaps. But one when we've gone to this 3x3x3 approach, I mean, it's a way to change how we've done things in the past with, perhaps undefined scopes and scopes that continually changed. But there is a waiver process to that 3x3x3 as well. And I don't know if that's understood by many. I think we did that for the Brandon Road study, for example. But to scope it and get agreement on what is it we're trying to deliver, I think is absolutely the only way you can do it. And I admit that we're trying to move us on a timeline that's not necessarily even comfortable for all, even with a particular waiver, but we know there's more work to be done on that. So I agree 100% with you, Drew. Thanks. Please.
I'm going to give you a little criticism.
I'm open. I couldn't.
Everybody knows that I do that.
Yep.
Nothing personal.
No, I'm a servant.
Drainage district with 30,000 acres in it. 6 years ago, we attempted to upgrade our levee, get a 100-year certification. We were turned down in that process. Went to the process of improving our levee. It took us 6 years to finally get the permit.
This is the 408 permit?
Yes.
Right.
I hope what happens after one of these meetings is, that's ridiculous. And it shouldn't take that long to be able, with their own money we're going to pay for.
Right.
Public-private partnership, we were doing it ourselves.
Right.
And we couldn't get it done. And that doesn't, my father helped build the Clarksville Dam. They didn't have a study. They knew what it would do for the country, and we did it. And now, all we do is regulate it to where we can't do it. It's got to change. Something has to be better than what I've had for the last 6 years. And I appreciate getting the permit, but at the same time, there's criticism there because it shouldn't take that long.
Right. There's no doubt changes around the corner here. I mean, literally. I mean, it's happening as we speak on regulatory permitting. There's a lot of focus within the Corps, and not just with 408s, but of course the 404 process and the environmental side as well. It's time is money, and it's driving things to make them uneconomical, which should happen. I mean, based on what you've been doing historically as a family and making use of, this land's resources. There's no doubt that we can do this better. I'm confident we can do it better. But thanks for the comment. And I don't take it as criticism at all. I think it's a good challenge for us. If there's anything I took away from traveling, when you leave the nation, you go to another country, what we have is our way of doing things. While it's not necessarily the most efficient, it's what I defend, and all those sons and daughters that you're related to as well do, and that is the effectiveness that we have, albeit not the most efficient. There's nothing else like it. It takes a lot of patience, which is probably exceeding what we should be patient with, and that's how our nation gets things done, when we become very impatient and make it happen. So I think we're going to get to that tipping point on some things. Hopefully it's not a crisis. We respond very well to a crisis and get some things done. I think we can do it better and smarter, earlier. All right. Please.
This is an easy one for you. Name 3 or 4 things you're proud of since you've been in this position.
So, in this position as the commander for the Mississippi Valley Division? Well, first of all, I'm very thankful. I don't know if it's considered proud, but the reality is just to be able to serve in this capacity is on the backs of many in this audience that started in the Vicksburg district. I mean, I started there in 2007. So I'm incredibly proud that I'm just now starting to understand the complexities of what we try to do as an organization in partnership. So, I mean, that's the key, is I think we've got a great agency. I mean, the Corps does what is authorized in the law, and when we don't, we go through that process as well in the courts. But I'm very proud of the team that can make that work. We were builders. We have taken on this mission of regulatory because that's what the nation wanted, and that's what we're trying to improve. So certainly proud of that team, but I'd say the second thing while being in command is realizing that, and I get to observe this in the Mississippi River Commission when we go up and down the river aboard the motor vessel Mississippi and hear the testimonies that occur in each town that we'll stop in. Last year we did have the chance to go from St. Paul all the way down Where did we end up? In Baton Rouge, I think. I'm incredibly proud that our nation is willing to have the public debate and hopefully elect the right officials that'll make the laws or put the money where it's needed. That doesn't happen in many countries that I've gone through, and the fact that our nation can make that work is pretty impressive. I call it the public debate. It doesn't necessarily happen as fast as we want it to, but the options aren't very good when you consider what other nations have done. What was most shocking in that little trip I mentioned is that normally nations that you visit are saying, oh yeah, your history is only about 200 years old. Well, some of these nations we visited have about a 4-year history in terms of big swings in their government. So we've got some great examples that others want to follow, so very proud of that. And if you're looking for a third thing, all of us have got people that are going to follow us. So, I can reference the sons and daughters that join in the military and serve in uniform. But when you, I met a gentleman who's an engineer named Matt. I don't think he's here right now. But here's a guy that has got 2 kids, I think 2 and 9 or something. Has already got his professional engineer license. He's got his PMP license for program management. And he is doing, more than I ever even thought about doing. So the future is in great hands. And I hope, as all of us, I got, my wife and I have 2 children that are eager to contribute as well. So I'm pretty proud of the folks that are following us. I guess that comes with being in the Army for so long. You see the sons and daughters that are joining, still volunteering. So pretty proud of that. All right. Well, thanks. Appreciate that one. Please go ahead.
What does it take to keep the colonels longer within the district?
Yeah, this is a great question. The reality is, the Corps of Engineers have got a great history as a nation being in the Army. These are uniformed members that serve in troop units, and it clearly is working in terms of leadership that they're learning, and that they can come into a community at the grassroots level and start to understand local governance. So I am in awe of the talent that exists in those colonels. I'll speak from personal experience. If colonels were to stay longer within those districts, they would not go much farther in the Army. It is the reality of it. I think the Army's got some exceptions for doctors and lawyers, perhaps, but if you want an engineer, in this case, that understands what the Corps does, you let them go, and they come back. I'm blessed to be able to come back as a general officer, and the others that have come back, above my pay grade, have benefited from the ability to be part of a community that all of you have helped educate that person on, and that they can contribute at a higher level. I rely heavily on the civilian team to train those new colonels. It is a burden, but it's worth the investment. So they're not going to stay any longer than 3 years. That's just my experience. I think sometimes generals will stay more than 3 or 4 years potentially, but that's because they're done. There's not much more you can train them on. But I think you've got a great thing that works with the colonels. Some actually leave in 2 years. If that hasn't happened, that's usually because that colonel needs something else that they don't have to catch up maybe with their peers. But it's a great question. Our chief of engineers is constantly asked that question by senators and congressmen. Sometimes he's asked why a colonel can't leave sooner, but that's a whole other story. I resemble that remark on occasion as a colonel.
I think the challenge is we've got long-range problems with short-term
We do.
help.
We do. So the DPMs that provide that continuity, we choose those people very carefully. So I know John Pikert's here, and you got Dennis. Are there any other deputy? No, just the 2 of you, I guess. Both within the last year or 2, I think. So they've got to bridge the next colonel and make sure that they're up to speed very quickly. So, all right. What other questions do you have? Okay, I'm going to ask a couple questions, if you don't mind. And anybody can answer these. I'm not going to pinpoint anybody. The first question I've got, because I move around a lot within the different duty stations, and I don't necessarily see how tough it is between states. I start to learn a little bit of the history. But the question I've got is, what does it take? I don't mean to pick on John, but between states to say, look, I will absorb something so that for the greater good. What is it? This type of forum, like tomorrow when we have multiple DNRs together representing it, or does it take governors to do that? I guess we could look at history maybe with the MRT and sense how that happened, but I'm talking about today. If I was to try to talk to, because I really enjoy talking to the Mississippi Towns and Cities Initiative, MRCTI, Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. The mayors are great, salt of the earth leaders, but I don't know if they've got the traction nor the ability to stretch beyond their local electoral body. But I'm just asking, at what level can you bring states together? Is it governors? Please?
Just an observation I have, it seems like so often the discussion's been what my neighbor shouldn't do.
Right.
But it seems like it makes a lot more sense for me to say, how can I help my neighbor? I go back to use the example of the good fire engine. Both towns should have good fire engines.
Right.
And somehow we just flipped it over and it's all about what neighbors shouldn't do. And so I'd like to see one state approach the other state, how can I help you make something better for you?
Right. I think that's a great point, because to compete at the global level, you've got to be cooperating with your neighbors at a minimum. I hear a lot of that as we try to get things out through the Southwest Pass to China, you name it, anywhere in the globe. And if that commodity is coming from a particular state that has reached well beyond the continental United States, it doesn't seem to last. I'm assuming it may not last long if they're just not cooperating with their neighbors. That's a great point. And maybe that'll help. Mike?
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I think we actually achieved that. The public hearings we did not have probably enough during the comp plan, but we had districts in the St. Louis area, south of St. Louis, that said we realized that we would take water before the flood wall in St. Louis. And so people were coming out and they recognized it. So as Jim was just mentioning, we really have a lot of people wanting to work together and make everybody improve to the extent absolutely possible, but also recognizing if there is a problem, there's willingness to understand what economically needs to happen. And so I think we're a lot further along than what some people may think. That we probably should have had more public hearing. We asked for those, didn't have the funding to have more input, but we actually got a long way toward achieving that. I think Kyle's here in front of me. He heard a lot of those meetings. I think that people are very close to say, and just like you heard Hannah, people are willing to work together, both sides of the river. People are willing to help each other on both sides of the river. The Bad District across from Quincy, we had nothing but tremendous amount of support from Illinois to help Missouri and vice versa. Missouri was helping on the other side. So we had a lot of cooperation, a lot of support, so everybody could prevent themselves from flooding. And I think the framework's there. You're always going to have a few people that may not be happy, but for the most part, I think these districts, they've been here since between 1880 and 1920. They've been here a long time. They know what they have, they know what they need. Just listen to the people, which I think you heard a little bit in panel.
Yep. No, absolutely. I was very impressed with that. To me, that's worth defending. The ability to have that public interaction and to come together. So I'm going to go to my second question. Does anyone remember, and I'm dating myself here, but this is when I first ever met a chief of engineers. So Lieutenant General Art Williams. Anyone know that name? I guess when he was the division, well, of course the Corps folks do. When he was the division commander, I guess it was the Lower Mississippi River Division. The reason I bring his name up is he was a chief of engineers that understood the Civil Works mission. And normally, I guess I say normally, at least within my memory, we don't have that many chiefs of engineers that come out of that strong Civil Works or background, or at least that exposure. And I'm sure he had more than just Civil Works, but most division commanders that leave Mississippi Valley Division go up to headquarters and become our deputy commander for Civil Works. You've got Ed Jackson up there, great battle buddy that I really enjoy working with. I don't know that I'll have that opportunity actually to take that position, because I think Ed's going to continue to hold that, which is great for continuity. The question I've got is, I mentioned I don't know much more time. Actually, that's not true. I've got at least 3 or 4 years left today. I hope I can keep serving. But I will be up in headquarters eventually, as far as I can tell. What is it that you'd like me to take into the headquarters? And that's a loaded question. I'm sure everybody in the Corps just braced for impact. But if you could what's the message that you need me to start to understand and add to the body of knowledge up there? It's traditionally just been the deputy commander for Civil Works, and his lane is pretty busy by itself. But if it's like as a deputy under General Semonite, that's a unique opportunity to. Please.
One size doesn't fit all, and this isn't flyover country.
Yeah, this is a great point. There's a lot of drive to make one division template size fit all, and that doesn't work because every division. You can talk to the Pacific Ocean folks that are working with other countries. That's just an example. So I like that theme. I think it's easier to keep track of one size, but the reality is it's not very effective. So, please.
General, I've been thinking about your previous question for a few minutes.
Right.
And I guess what I think it would take to get the states to buy into the solution, a lot of that is already offered up in the Word of language. When we're talking about this study that's authorized in Word for the Corps to do, go back to the comments about scoping. I think if we do a proper scoping that's inclusive,
Right.
and a process that's transparent, then I think we can get to that point. Because it's as everybody here said, there's a solution out here. We just have to get all the folks to the table and identify what that plan is. And to go back to Commissioner R.D. James on the motor vest, or no, I think he said that up at the Hannibal meeting. He made the point that we are not going to come up with a solution unless we have a consensus. So let's get started on that consensus, and I think we've got to be careful with the study language.
Yep. And I'm, Mr. James is constantly, coaching me and educating me as well. And the reality is, we are obligated as an MRC to help enable that. We can't come up with it, I think, is the key point he was driving at. But he is absolutely committed to being that active member within the Mississippi River Commission. We have other examples I could go in with some of the other members. Norma Jean Mattei down in New Orleans as a professor. We just brought on Rear Admiral Shep Smith out of NOAA. Extremely excited to have him aboard. And the point is, we would like to help enable, within our authorities, and not just come up with a solution in a vacuum, but like you said, transparent and collaborative is key, or inclusive. So thanks. Please.
General Wehr, the thing I would say is that the economic activity that happens in the upper Mississippi River Basin, just on the main stem, the counties closest to the river, is $345 billion in annual economic activity. And so not only is it not flyover country, it's a significant portion of this country's economy.
Right.
60% of the grain exports come past St. Louis on the Mississippi River. This is important, and I think we can do a better job. We all can do a better job than what we've been doing on moving and on communicating that message and the importance and improving we say infrastructure, it's the foundation of our economy. And so our ability to continue to enjoy this $345 billion, and that's a conservative estimate, and that's only looking at the 2 counties that directly border the river. That's dominated by manufacturing, agriculture, tourism, and outdoor recreation. All these discussions about flood risk reduction, reducing flood damages, and our navigation infrastructure, all those things are extremely important into what's going to happen in the coming decades in this region in terms of economic activity. And so it's extremely important. These things are not just important to get a name over, but the one message I would say is the importance of the economic activity that happens in this.
Yeah, and I think something is, hope that doesn't blow up or something, but I think it's working. I mean, the fact that, you've got blocks 20 to 25 within that list of 50, that speaks volumes. The fact that that message is at least resonating on paper. Now, whether it gets into the cash flow will be another issue. I'm not sure what that noise is, but I'm going to step away.